All right, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to another day of SaberSim's DFS Office Hours. It is Monday, November 8th of 2021. Thank you for tuning into the stream today. It is a Monday here, which means we've got a couple different things to take care of on stream today. We'll be announcing the winners of this week's weekly Max Challenge and also doing our giveaways for free tickets next week, which is always fun. I know there's always a lot of excitement about that. We've also got a bunch of questions here in our queue already. Plenty of questions to answer on today's stream. As always, if you guys have questions, go ahead and get them into the queue now. Pop them into the Office Hours channel in Slack, pop them into the YouTube chat, and we will get to everything today. I hope you guys are doing well after the NFL carnage of yesterday. Underdogs winning games all over the place, chalk in pretty much every single game, busting out. Depending on the way that you built your lineups, might have been a good day. Maybe you're a bit of a more contrarian player. If you played a little bit chalkier, probably wasn't so good of a day. But hope you guys enjoyed the NFL games anyway here. Had a decent little NBA slate last night too. Good looking NBA slate tonight. No Embiid. Going to be another Drummond night. These slates are always kind of fun when everybody's trying to guess where that value is, or not so much guess in the case of a guy like Drummond, but then you start talking about the second and the third string guys or whatever, where all that value is going to go. Got a 3-game hockey slate tonight. If you guys missed it, we did a hockey stream last week. Had Couch and Mr. Clean on teaching me the ways of NHL DFS. So go check that out if you haven't seen that already. Decent little hockey slate. Better slate tomorrow, probably. I think there's 10 games tomorrow, but a little 3-gamer tonight. And Monday Night Football, of course. Not so sure about the quality of football we're going to get tonight with Bears and Steelers. But it seems like every primetime game this season, it's been flipped. You know, you expect the games you thought were going to be good that you're looking forward to all day. You're like, this is going to be a good game. Have not really been good. The games that are like, yeah, these aren't really any good teams, don't really want to watch that, you end up getting a pretty good product. So, for my best guess, I wouldn't be surprised if we get the game of the year here tonight, watching the Bears and Steelers go at it. But of course, Monday Night Showdown contests are always pretty big. So anyway, excited to be here today. Lots to talk about. We'll go ahead and we'll start jumping into things. I know the number one thing that most of you guys are probably excited for is indeed the giveaways. Oh, I just closed my window. Whoops. All right. Let's see. I had it all primed up here and then I closed it and now I got to get it back. So let's go ahead and do that real quick here. Looking like a rookie here up on stream today, right off the bat. All right. Let's go ahead. We'll pull up the stream. I want to start with this just in case. I'm not going to read all this today. I know I've talked about this here pretty much every single day on stream. Week 9 now in the books, going into week 10. I think you guys are getting the hang of this here. But for those of you that maybe don't know what we're doing, quick overview. If you wear the SaberSim logo on FanDuel and DraftKings, or FanDuel or DraftKings, max out either the Pooch Punt or the Minimax on the Sunday main slate, and send Andy at SaberSim.com an email showing your entries that you're wearing the SaberSim avatar and with your username on the site visible, you get entered into this giveaway. You get an opportunity to win tickets to play the contest for free the following week, and if you're the highest scoring player of people that entered in the contest, you get some other awesome gear. Very cool turn of events this week in this particular contest, but that's pretty much it. There's also, if you participate every week, I know there are still a chunk of you guys that have participated every single week here, some guaranteed prizes at the end of the season, which will be upon us here pretty quickly. I really can't believe that we're going into week 10 here, but I'll go ahead. Let me go ahead and pop this quickly into the Office Hours channel in Slack. If by chance you are watching this stream for the first time and haven't seen this before, go check out that link in Slack or just email support@sabersim.com. We'll get you up to speed here. But plenty of questions today to answer on stream, so I want to just jump right in. So let's start with the winners of this week. And a very, very cool thing overall happened today. So on DraftKings, our winner, 12th overall in the Minimax. I think that might be our highest overall scorer in the Minimax so far this season, is M. Dumbluski. 12th overall in the mini max. Congratulations. You will win I got to update this. I mentioned it last week. I haven't updated it. 2 tickets to a $50 and a $27 single entry contest, a free month of SaberSim, and an entry to the private DraftKings $5,000 free roll at the end of the season. On FanDuel, our first place winner, or not first place in the contest, but our overall highest finisher, 573rd place overall in the Pooch Putt, is M. Dumbluski. The same guy wins it in both here. A pretty awesome result overall. So I imagine probably a pretty good scoring week overall for you. But on the FanDuel side, you will get $25 in SaberSim credit, another free month of SaberSim, so racking up the SaberSim here, but then also an entry to the private $1,000 FanDuel free roll at the end of the season. So quite a bit of rewards there from M. Dumble here. Congratulations. That's pretty amazing. I imagine rolled with a pretty similar maybe approach to the slate on both sites. I imagine had to have been somewhat of a more contrarian stance on the slate overall on a week where a ton of chalk failed. Like seriously, almost all the chalk failed. I guess maybe going in with kind of a similar approach to the slate on both sites might get you there. But pretty amazing. So congratulations again. Still looking for that Bink. There are some pretty awesome awards when somebody finally comes and binks one of these. I'm hoping we get one. We've had some really close results. 12th place in a mini max is amazing. Honestly, once you're in the top like 0.1%, especially of a contest, I think it's basically pure luck when you end up getting that first place. But hopefully we have that dice roll work in our favor and we get somebody up right at the top, number 1 spot in either the Pooch Punt or the Mini Max before the end of the season. But congratulations again. And let's go ahead and jump into the giveaway. So that is the second part of this here. We'll do DraftKings first. We'll go back to our wheel of names. I just learned that I can actually close that ad here, which haven't done all season. So you guys have been staring. Last week we had Shaq's face up here on the side of the screen the entire time. But anyway, let's get into this. So 3 people that entered DraftKings this week will win tickets to play the Mini Max for next week. So I'll go ahead. We'll start here. 56th. I just saw Cody said, oh, wow, I was 600 and didn't think I'd be that close. You were actually second. So you were right behind there. But anyway, let's go ahead. Let's do our DraftKings giveaway here. I have 56 entrants into this. And remember, you got to send in your entries by 1 p.m. Eastern time on Mondays to get in time. So we have enough time to get this set up on our end. But 56 people for DraftKings this week. We got 56 up top, all looking good. We'll spin the wheel 3 times. You win $75 in ticket value to play the Mini Max for next week. So let's do it without much further ado. And it's Albus. Congratulations, Albus. 150 free tickets to the Mini Max next week. Go ahead and pull your name off here. Do another spin here. Winner number 2 for this week. Oh, BCAP had a sweat on both of those. BCW, W. Congratulations. And our last pull of the lever for this week for the DraftKings side, of course, is Rusty Trombone. Congratulations, Rusty Trombone. So to all of our DraftKings winners here, the 3 giveaway winners and M. Dumbluski, you guys will get an email before the end of the day here letting you know that you won, of course. Again, I don't know why I say that every week. I say that every single time. I guess it's maybe for everybody else. If you weren't watching this, you wouldn't know you're getting the email, but whatever. That doesn't really matter anyway. You'll have your tickets in your account by the end of the week. So I know there have been some questions. There's been a little bit of variance week to week of when those tickets are showing up in the account, but they have been pretty consistently getting in there by the end of the day Friday. So expect those tickets then. And let's go ahead and jump over to the FanDuel side. The one thing on FanDuel, and I mentioned it here at the start, talking about the prizes, but for FanDuel, we are still giving out SaberSim credit here. It has been a bit of a difficult story getting, oh wait, let me do that and grab this too. Grab our winners here. Been a little bit of a difficult journey here getting this set up to actually award tickets out here so far this season. So we've been giving out the value of the tickets as SaberSim credit, going to be continuing to do that here this week. So this will be $77.50 of SaberSim credit. This is stacking too. So I know there's been a few people that have now won in multiple weeks, and you get your email saying, let you know you've won. And I think the email says something like, hey, you'll now have $7.50 off of your next week's or your next month's SaberSim invoice, right? That will stack. So like if you've won it twice, you've got $15 of credit. If you've won it 3 times, don't know if anybody has, but you'd have $22.50 of SaberSim credit. So I know a little bit less exciting maybe than the tickets themselves, but still the same value, works out in the end. So $7.50 of SaberSim credit here for the winners of the FanDuel drawing here. Let me go ahead and clear out this. And we have 61 entrants. Let me double check that that's right. 61 looking good. And we're going to do this 10 times. 10 winners here. You got like 1 in 6 shot at this every week. So it definitely makes sense to play at least on FanDuel every single week. But let's go ahead and do it. Let's see what happens here. Nine-car pileup. Congratulations. 9-car pileup sounds like a bit of a mess. Winner number 2 here. Oh, right on the edge. Very close. 34 Midway Monster. Congratulations. A name I remember seeing up here before. Definitely somebody that's won here before. Best shot to win multiple weeks is to play multiple weeks. Don't forget. Ryux. I think that's probably how that's pronounced. Ryux. Our 3rd winner here. Winner number 4. Is Kelvin Dubs, who had a very legitimate sweat in the mini-max last week, and I think won our giveaway, or not our giveaway, won the contest last week, highest scorer, but was a legitimate bink sweat for a bit there. Winner number 5 here. The Great DC 203 on a bit of a giveaway heater. Definitely a name I remember seeing at least a couple times here. Congratulations, Great DC. JCD 78. Congratulations, JCD. Number 7 here. Is T-Swift 98. 3 more for this week before we cap off another week of the Max Challenge. Guitar Bet 001. The spinner kind of makes my eyes bug out when I watch it too much. Oh, no, the heater continues. M. Dumbluski with the giveaway win as well. What a week. All we needed was for a win on the DraftKings giveaway, too, and you'd have the full sweep. And our last spin for this week here is, I assume that's Dr. Farm D. Dr. Farmed, maybe? Either way, congratulations. Our final winner for the FanDuel giveaway this week. Let me go ahead. We'll grab these names, and I will write these down here on my notes. Again, make sure we get an email out to everybody that won before the end of the day today, letting you know how to expect either your tickets or your SaberSim credit or what that means. Keep playing this. You know, you guys can play this every single week on both sites. The more weeks you play, the better shot you have. You see there's multiple people now winning across multiple weeks. If you remember to play, the only way to have a shot at it is to play each week. So the one thing I will say, we're going into week 10 here now, getting to that time of the year. I know giving out free stuff is always pretty exciting. We've always got a lot of people here watching on stream, but to keep things fresh, we're planning on doing something a little special for the Thanksgiving Day games. Don't know exactly what that's going to look like yet. Don't want to pull back the curtains too much here. So I will just go ahead and leave it at that. That will not be, when is that? That is 2 weeks from Thursday. Wow. 2 weeks from Thursday. So that is wild. But yeah, stay tuned for that. So anyway, we'll go ahead and Cody said the fix is in. Yeah. Maybe M. Dumbluski hacked my wheel of names here. Something's funny. I don't know. But anyway, just kidding. We'll go ahead and Eric says got the name Dr. Farm D spot on. Nice. Yeah, I'm running a little hot on pronouncing names correctly. So I've had that a couple times here where had to take a shot at it one way or the other, and I just so happen to nail it. So that's good. Maybe I can start running a little hotter with my DFS play. But at least I'm getting the names right. So anyway. Cool. Let's go ahead. We'll go ahead and transition here, get into it, start answering some questions. Again, I've probably got maybe close to a dozen questions to talk about here already. So as always, Monday stream's a little busier. Go ahead and pop your questions into YouTube chat or into the Office Hours channel in Slack. I'd get them in now. If you have something you've been waiting to ask, get it in now because I'm going to try to tackle these in roughly chronological order. And Mondays are always busy days here. Got a lot to talk about, but let's go ahead. Enough of looking at the spinny wheel, and we'll jump over to SaberSim. Oh, real quick. Let me go ahead and pull this off because I'm not logged in yet. And let me get logged in to the app here. And go ahead and dive in. Someone told me it's easier to see light mode, so I'm going to keep light mode up. If I'm burning anybody's eyes out, let me know. I was doing dark mode for a long time. I know we had some debate back and forth about what is the truly elite view mode here last week, but it does sound like for streams, maybe it's a little bit easier to see the light theme. So I've been rolling with that. But again, let me know what you guys think, what you prefer. And we'll go ahead and jump into questions. So there were a few questions that came in yesterday. We're going to hit these first. First one's from DIY Guy 13. And he said, in office hours, 11.5 NBA research stream, you mentioned running the research build at 0-0-10 might lead you astray, as the optimal might not represent the winning lineup. Would decreasing sim variance to 7 to 9 range for this research build be an alternative for the issue? And said, by the way, enjoy the hands-on approach used in office hours. Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you for the kind words, DIY guy. Yeah, I did mention this here. So I mentioned this a couple days ago. First of all, for those of you that don't know, again, when we're talking about these things that are a little bit unique, always want to make sure people are up to speed. A research build, we'll talk about a research build. It's something that I do, particularly in baseball and football. But what I do is I'll change the sliders to 0-0-10, and I'll build 1,500 lineups. And the value of this, what you're getting out of this, is when sim variance is at 10 and these other factors are just off, what we're doing is we're taking a single game simulation out of our thousands of simulations for every game. We're doing that for every single game on the slate. And we're building the optimal lineup for that random set of game sims just based on what people scored in those game simulations. And then we're doing that 1,500 times with different game sim combinations for every time. So we're essentially simulating the slate 1,500 times and looking at what optimals might look like. And I had mentioned here on this stream that DIY guy mentioned, and I said that on NBA, there's a couple reasons that I don't do research builds, actually. And the first is because they take time. And when news breaks in NBA, as it tends to right before lock, a lot of times you have to update everything at the final second. Maybe if news breaks, 76ers have been notorious for breaking news pretty late this year. And if they come out and tell us, man, can you imagine how, what would even happen to the slate if they just said, Andre Drummond is sitting at 6:45 Eastern time, right? That could happen, right? Then everything you've done, all your research doesn't matter. But the bigger point there, maybe not the bigger point, but another reason why I don't like to do these in NBA is because what you are doing when you do a research build is you're basically saying that the optimal lineups you get out of slate simulations approximate what the winning lineup looks like. And in NBA, I don't think that's as much the case, right? You can see that sim variance comes down quite a bit from 10 when you actually use default settings. So I don't think it is as strong of a value because the exposures that you see at your research build don't approximate the rate at which somebody is likely to be in the winning lineup. So the question here is, can I just run builds at something like this, right? Like 0-0-8 and bring down sim variance a little bit and look at it that way. I think that's interesting. I think part of the reason this research builds works is because sliders, I don't know why that's happening. That's weird. So when your slider is at 10 for sim variance in particular, it's a very unique level, right? Because you've gotten all the way down to single game simulations, and that matches what's actually going to happen on the court, right? Like they're only going to play the games once tonight. And I don't know if necessarily bringing down sim variance and running a build like this, for example, gets you something still very useful. Like at this point, you're almost talking about lineups that are just straight up playable, right? These are like lineups that weird stuff with the sliders today. I will look into that and see what's going on there. These are lineups that like are essentially almost playable. They're using like a grouping of game simulations, a relatively variant set. You've turned ownership fade off, but at this point, like I don't know if you're actually learning something meaningful about how optimally owned a player is on the slate, because the sims have been grouped at this point. You're using buckets of game simulations. You've lost kind of the magic of what's actually happening here at sim variance 10 when we're using single game simulations, right? So what I would say is, what I think the better advice that I would give to you in this particular case is to, if you want to still run research builds, I think that's fine, but take them with a bigger grain of salt than you do with other sports. Rather than running your research builds with a lower sim variance, because I think you're quickly just going to lose the value of what a research build is supposed to be anyway, I would say you still run them this way, but take them with a bigger grain of salt. And I would say wherever your line is of where you start to make a decision, like this player is over leveraged or under leveraged, and I'm going to fade or lock or double the field or half the field, right? Make that bar higher. It should take more for you to want to fade a player here with NBA, because it's a lower variance sport. So let me know if that was helpful, DIY guy. Again, for everybody else watching, if you're not familiar with the research builds, and maybe if you didn't watch this particular stream on November 5th, this question might not be as useful for you, but let me know, DIY guy, if that helped clear that up a little bit. And again, big takeaway there is I would say keep running the research builds at the settings that I've described here, 0, 0, 10, because I think those are really the only settings where it works from a theoretical standpoint. But take it with a bigger grain of salt. Maybe put less stock into that than you might in a different sport, higher variance sport. So, but cool. Let's keep it rolling here. Real quick, we'll hit this question real quick. Clement said, can you please add a group tab? I assume maybe you're talking about like player group combinations. We've talked about this. It's a big project on our end to implement this. And I think the reality is, or at least where we've arrived at, is that these player groups that you might see on a traditional optimizer here just are not as necessary on SaberSim, because we understand the precise correlations between players. Let's jump over to a higher correlation sport like football, right? We understand exactly what the precise correlations of players are because we've simulated every game out play by play. We leverage those correlations and make sure that you are emphasizing players that are positively correlated and de-emphasizing players that are negatively correlated at the appropriate level of how negatively correlated and positively correlated those players are, right? And we know how much to value that based on our correlation slider. A lot of what you would be trying to accomplish with player groups happen automatically in the builder itself, right? We also have the stacking rules, obviously, if you want a bit more control over what your individual lineup constructions look like. So I frankly don't think player groups is going to be added. One thing that is probably going to be added, and one thing that we want to do here, is give users a bit more control over what happens in step 3. So in step 3 already, you can edit and I don't know, this is some build that was probably just left in here from last week. Okay, yeah, so old projections here, it's a bit weird, but you obviously can edit your stack types as it is, right? But we do want to give people more control over editing what combinations of players they get. I think this is a research build. Yeah, 0, 0, 10. But we do want to give people more control over what combinations you're getting in step 3. So right now you can edit your like QB stacks, but we want to be able to say like, show me lineups where there are 2 players from the same team that doesn't have the QB. And then if you want to eliminate them, great. Or show me lineups where the running back is stacked with the defense. And if you want to emphasize more lineups with them, great, we can do that. So that is probably coming, but a like player group control in step one, like you might see a different optimizer, we are almost certainly not going to add because we don't think it adds value, to be honest. We do not think it is a better approach than the way our correlation slider works to begin with. So, but a good question and one that comes in often here. So I wanted to touch on that here. I'm going to continue to roll through some of these questions that come in Slack because they came in early this morning. And then we'll get to some of the questions here that are sitting in the YouTube chat coming in live. This is from Jared, and he said, does SaberSim factor in a short week for teams playing on the Thursday night game? It does not. It does not. If you have an edge on what you think that means for a given team, I would say it can be a spot to add value. I would say be careful a little bit there because I think what exactly that necessarily means to a team is uncertain. Both of the teams playing in that game, I mean, maybe not every week, right? Sometimes maybe a team has a game on Sunday, they're bye, and then they come back to a Thursday night game. I don't know if that's happening this week. So maybe it's not always the case where both teams are facing that disadvantage. If you think that amounts to a 1 point disadvantage, a 2 point, right? I know home field advantage is typically described as a field goal's worth of point value, right? I hear that rule of thumb said often. I don't know what short week amounts to. I don't know. But we are not doing anything manually or impacting the model in that way to account for something like that. So if you want to take maybe some shots on maybe some backup players coming into the game and try to play the injury game, I think you can definitely do that. But I would say just those things, those are simultaneously like good situations to look into when it's a situation that is difficult to model and might be something that the model is not taking into account for, but also very hard to do, right? It's hard to know necessarily what is the impact of a short week ultimately. Does the defense play worse? Does the offense play worse? Does the whole team play worse? Do the starters play less snaps? Like, that's tough. So, but good question there here. Okay, cool. Let's keep it rolling here. Again, a few more questions that came in this morning. As always, too, guys, while I'm working through this stuff, if you have follow-up questions or if I say something that is confusing, or sometimes I watch these back to timestamp them and post them to YouTube, and I realize I just said something that was like, I misspoke. I just said something that was flat out wrong. If I say something and you're confused, let me know. That's why I'm here live. That's why I do these live. So Neil said, new user here. Can you show me how to late swap individual lineups rather than having to choose the entire contest? Especially for NFL, I'd like to have the ability to adjust the ownership slider based on how an individual lineup is performing prior to the afternoon games. Yeah, really good question. So at the moment, unfortunately, there's not really a great way to do that. One of the things we are working on behind the scenes here, very early in this process, but started kind of on a new project here, is to incorporate that into the late swap tool overall to basically have the ability to late swap lineups differently based on how they're currently performing. So that is something to look forward to. But at the moment, the only way to actually do that if you wanted to late swap a specific lineup would be to chop it out of your entries file and upload it separately. At that point, I think maybe that's something that you would like. For me personally, if I have a lineup that has a legit sweat that I'm like looking at it going into the afternoon games and I'm like, this lineup can compete, I may just late swap that by hand potentially. But if you wanted to do that in the entry editor, what you would want to do is, so you'd go get your entries file here. Let's go ahead. Let's do this here first. Let's load these in because I think I have a bunch of reserved lineups. So we'll go ahead. We'll put these in. Let's get some lineups in here first. Always nice on stream. I mention here on stream regularly that you should never enter the afternoon with dummy lineups in, right? But I mean, really probably want to fill them as soon as you enter the contests. But and I need 47 here. Oh, not 477. 47. And let's do this and this so we can get our lineups. Save. Okay. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and get these in. Thanks for bearing with me here, everybody, while I get these in and upload. Cool. Okay. So now let's say we're late swapping, right? Now I can actually hypothetically late swap. So again, by default, you're going to late swap all 47. You can pick different slider settings. I think one thing that's very easy to do here is like if you have lineups that have a legit sweat and you're going into the late games, right? At that point, you may not care so much about the lineups that aren't competitive. And that's typically how I do it. So like if I have lineups, this is NBA, I know that, but even for NFL, if I'm having a good week and I have lineups that I think like multiple lineups that I think are doing well, I think I will typically just late swap in a way that is conducive to those lineups. So if I'm doing really well, maybe I'm turning down ownership fade and I'm turning down variance and trying to just get better plays into the lineups for the late games. You can also select the individual contests, right? So like I know maybe in your 3-entry max, you have one lineup with a sweat and the other two that aren't really doing anything. Maybe you just select it and late swap all 3 of those lineups together and knock your sliders down a bit to account for that. Or vice versa. If you can group a few contests, like if I'm just dead in the quarter jukebox, right? And maybe like these 2 single entries, maybe I will late swap these together. And well, correlation probably stays where it is, but maybe you're turning your ownership fade and your variance up, right? But the most rigorous way of doing this, where you are getting down to the individual lineup level, right, and taking a specific lineup out of your entries file and saying, I only want to late swap this lineup with this settings, you're going to have to create a new entries file, edit your entries file directly, save it, and re-upload that and late swap that separately. I think that's fine for NFL, where you typically have like time to do that. NBA, I would say it's probably not worth it because you're going to be late swapping so often on a big slate, like an 8-game slate like tonight. There's going to be enough late swap windows where I think it just makes more sense to late swap everything together is typically what I end up doing, and kind of just group things by what your lineups look like overall. So you can get an idea looking at how many minutes are remaining on your players and where your lineups are currently placing and like what the lineups themselves look like if you're in the mix for that night, I think. And if you're not, maybe late swap with a little bit higher ownership fade or a higher variance. If you are, maybe take those things down a bit. I have mentioned here on stream before that for NBA in particular, okay, yeah. So Neil said this is much more specific for NFL than NBA. Yeah, and I'm sitting here rambling about NFL. I'll say this. Let's hop over to NFL because it's true either way. I typically take the approach overall for me at the lower stakes and like the big contest soft fields that I'm typically attacking. A lot of people don't late swap anyway. So I often am bringing down my sliders when I late swap anyway to account for that, right? Like ownership fade is great and all, and you want to take ownership into account, but when you know that the field isn't even going to react and update to news that breaks, then you don't need to value ownership fade and variance as much in your late swap. So I often turn my sliders down a little bit when I'm late swapping anyway. When big news breaks, there wasn't really one this week for football, at least as far as I'm aware of. But I don't think there was any. I think like most of the news for these 3 afternoon games, we kind of got what we were expecting, primarily in this game, right? Colt McCoy started and DeAndre Hopkins was out. That was what was expected. But if the opposite was true, then I would have swapped differently. But anyway, rambling now here. Let's go ahead and keep it rolling. So going to jump now here to this question. Again, doing this in chronological order. Nancy Drew Guy always leaves me a message in the morning here before I hop on. This question says, what advice would you give to somebody who's trying to qualify for either DraftKings or FanDuel World Qualifier? Thanks. Yeah, I would say probably only if you are playing all the best GPPs first, right? So I put this video up recently, depending on if you're talking about football or basketball, right? If you're talking about football, there's a lot of good contests to play. For basketball, you can max out all the best GPPs pretty quickly. But first of all, 2 good videos: Crush NBA DFS in 2021. This is the NBA side of contest selection, and in strategy sessions here, if you click into the playlist, how to double your NFL DFS ROI in 15 minutes. These are our 2 contest selection principles for these 2 sports. So I would say I wouldn't start playing qualifiers for live events until you are playing all the best GPPs first, at least, right? Because these are contests. These qualifier contests are going to be packed full of very sharp players. They're often not going to grade out very well from an effective entrance standpoint, and they are insanely top heavy, right? That's the way qualifiers are. They are sometimes they're like winner take alls, where like the value of the ticket and the prize package and the entry is like $50,000 and second place wins like $1,000, right? Like that's how top heavy they are. They're not objectively great bankroll building contests. They are I think definitely for people that are willing to chase these contests to try to get in, and are playing probably quite a bit of volume already in other great contests first. I think football does have a little bit of softer, maybe not softer, but like easier to play contests, right? They have like even some $1 and $5 qualifiers for these live events that I think is pretty unique. I don't think basketball has those. Let's see. Yeah, total prizes. So yeah, there's like a fantasy football world championship for $5 here. But you can see it's 16,000 people, right? The one single ticket up top is this is basically a winner take all of 16,000 people. It's a 150 max with only 16,000 people. Terrible effective entrance, right? Like tough contest to win. That's why I'd say maybe stay away from these until you're playing all the other best contests first. But from there, I would be very intentional with your lineups you are entering into these, and you are playing for a very high variance outcome, right? Like even already, if you were just playing a 150 max GPP at that contest size, 16,000 entrants, right? We would have variance cranked up to 9. Ownership fade is moderate, right? We're already playing for a very high variance outcome, right? But at a satellite, it's going to get cranked up, right? We're going to turn ownership fade up all the way to high. I think this is like one of the highest settings you'll see for NFL. Sim variance goes to 10, and it would probably go to 11 if it was possible, right? You really need to build lineups that are shooting for. You're trying to beat 16,000 other lineups where all of the prize is at that first place prize. So embrace variance, shoot for the moon, really, and expect to have a lot of losing weeks. You can very easily throw away a lot playing these contests. So there was a Twitter account, I think it was called like how the pros are doing, or how the pros do, or something like that. That was tracking for a while. It was tracking like high stakes and high volume DFS players, their performance in qualifiers, and just seeing how much money was thrown away, right? In those contests. I think people that are regularly maxing these out are kind of counting on an outcome where they can get a seat or multiple seats, and then including the payout of the actual live championship into their EV calculation for the qualifier. And it's just a long road to realize that expected value. You have to have a very big bankroll, I think, to be profitable in this particular chase, and a long time horizon. So it's certainly not in my contest mix, but yeah, there was a question more generically about when, like, are satellites worth playing, that I answered a couple weeks ago. And I think from a contest selection standpoint, like, this is similar, where I wouldn't even really entertain this or think about going this direction until I was playing all of the best GPPs that I've talked about here before. And then also, I would also probably at that point say you probably make sense to be playing all the best cash games. Like, I think cash games are even a better investment than this. So, but good question. And I have gone as a guest. I have not qualified myself, but I have gone as a guest to one of these. I went to the FanDuel baseball World Championship this year, and they're fun. They're definitely fun. Don't get me wrong. But I think even assuming you're going to make positive EV lineups for both the qualifier and the championship itself, which is a challenge in and already because the fields are so freaking sharp for both of those. It takes a very long time horizon and a lot of bankroll investment to realize that expected value. So tread carefully. But Cool. Let's go ahead, keep it rolling here. A question from Paul, and a good segue here into more contest selection stuff. He said, just finished watching some of the best contest videos and had a question. I've been playing on Yahoo, and I've heard it has less sharks, more overlay, etc. So good for a beginner, but none of the contests for NBA meet the 1K effective entrance. Yeah, the 25-cent game has a size of 4,500 and 130 max entries, so it would only take 35 goodish players to eat up all the entries. Should I be playing somewhere else, and where do you recommend? So Yahoo is a little bit of a different story, and let's go ahead and pull it up. Fantasy. It's a different story for a couple of reasons. So first of all, the rake on their contests is always pretty much significantly lower than what you get on DraftKings or FanDuel. And they're also a little bit more public about it, which is nice. But they say that up here management fee, 10%. So what you'll pay on a similar sized contest on DraftKings or FanDuel is 15 or 16%. That's a significant difference. It's an enormous difference. 6%, right? That like 6% of additional prizes in the pool amounts to a lot. These are better contests from a rake standpoint by far. Yahoo does also indeed overlay often. So I think that's a really good note. Overlay meaning when a contest doesn't fill, right, and it has guaranteed prizes, it means that Yahoo is footing the bill for paying out the prizes that aren't coming from entry fees. They also have guaranteed overlay contests pretty regularly. So you can see like for tonight, right? This has a negative. They're putting 25% of the prize pool into this themselves. They're doing that for acquisition of new players, right? So that's another, right? Like this isn't a 5% difference. This is a 40% difference compared to a 15% rake on another site. This is an enormous difference. This contest is basically positive EV just to play it at all. And they do have less sharks. So one, because they went, and whether you agree with this from a long-term strategy standpoint or not, I know this has been a contentious topic, but they went and more or less banned a portion of their player base, or banned them from all contests besides single entry contests at the start of this season. Anyone that was determined to be a super veteran based on past winnings on Yahoo. So their pool of players has been depleted a bit of extremely historically winning players on Yahoo. So all that to say, it makes the contest a lot softer. It makes the contest a lot more winnable. It makes the contest more profitable. I think you can definitely lower your effective entrance standpoints pretty significantly here. I know Ross, SaberSim Ross, he plays a lot of Yahoo, and I talked about this with him most recently, and he said that effective entrance isn't even really something that he's looking at Yahoo. His priority here is looking at the contests that have some of the lowest rake as possible, and also particularly hawking the lobby, especially close to lock, to look for contests that are going to overlay. Because if they overlay, then they're even more profitable. And I think that's a good approach overall. So the effective entrance standpoint is something that I think is a tool on some of the other sites where the rake is higher and the field is sharper. With a softer field here and lower rake, I don't think it's something as important. I think it can still be valuable to look at here if you're trying to determine or pick between contests. But again, you're just not going to find, like, this is the $100, 500 to first, right? 150 max, and there's only like 5,000 people in this contest. So yeah, I mean, a sharp player coming in here and maxing out all 150 is going to take up a lot of equity, but there's a lot of prize pool that's been kind of put back into this with a lower rake and the rest of the dead money in the contest that I think it's still profitable to play. Also, the one thing I've noticed too is that Yahoo is they're so aggressive with the way that they set the entry limits for these contests that I actually think sharp players probably won't even max these contests out as much. Like $150 to max this contest out for a contest that features $500 to first isn't something that a lot of people are even going to do, even sharp players, right? That you are representing, what is that? Let me look. You're taking up 150 entries of a 5,500 person contest. Like, you're taking up almost 3% of the entire contestant equity in that contest at all. At that point, your lineups start to compete with each other quite a bit. I think even sharp players might stick a little bit closer to like 50 entries in a contest like this, just because there's no reason there's not a very strong reason to max this contest out. So all of that to say, I think that the best approach here, if you want to play some Yahoo, I think it's a good site to play. Entry editor support for Yahoo is in the works. I know somebody's probably just waiting to ask me that. So we don't have the entry editor. We don't have late swap for Yahoo at the moment. So something to keep in mind, especially for NBA. I would be very cautious playing Yahoo NBA without an ability to late swap somehow. But I think Yahoo definitely works. I would say look for the lowest rate contests. Still, the other principles still apply. So try to get as many lineups down at the lower dollar contests before jumping up into higher dollar contests to spread out your variance. But play contests that are overlaying, play contests with low rake, and I think it can still be a pretty good approach on Yahoo. So don't worry so much about the effective entrance here, because almost none of the contests are going to really fit it. But sweet, good question. All right, let's keep it going. Flower Farmer has a good question here. And this is the last question that I got that came in before the stream started. So from here on out, we'll be tackling questions that came in live here on stream. This one will be pretty quick. He said, just finished washing a couple. Oh, wait. What happened? Did I copy the wrong thing? I think I did. Okay, yeah. So this is Flower Farmer. Just subbed. Don't have a solid NBA process down yet, as I haven't used optimizers for this sport before. It feels to me that I'm running sims 10 to 15 minutes before each set of game and making almost no changes. What are some things to do to improve my process? I think for NBA in particular, just setting it and forgetting it. Well, not set it and forget it actually, but just running a build with little changes. This is probably by far the most profitable sport to do that with, right? I think there's less value adds to do here, in particular for NBA. But I'm going to give you a bit of a curriculum here of videos to check out here, because I think we've covered NBA strategy in a lot more detail in some of these strategy sessions here. So I would say the very first one to watch, again, this is on our site or on our YouTube channel under strategy sessions. So first one, the 4 keys to beating NBA DFS in 2021. This is like an hour-long breakdown of overall NBA strategy. Must watch if you are playing NBA for the first time. And probably very useful if you've played NBA a lot in the past, but watch this one first. Then go and watch Late Swap is the biggest edge in NBA DFS in 2021. The title reveals the story of this video, but I actually think this is true. I think the value that you add to your lineups after lock is way more valuable than the value you add before lock in NBA for a few reasons, real quickly, because news breaks late in NBA, it breaks often in NBA, and it is very impactful in NBA, right? Scratch to somebody that you expected to be in the lineup in baseball and some other guy comes in, doesn't really change the way you think about that team overall. Not really. Maybe if it's one of the best players, maybe Tatis is out. Okay, maybe you're a little less interested in those Padres stacks, right? Giannis gets ruled out after lock, changes the slate completely. Changes the entire slate. Doesn't just change the Bucks. It changes the entire slate. New value has opened up on the Bucks. You can get different stars in other games. Everything has changed. And it happens a lot. Starting lineups come out late and players sit all the time in basketball. So it is legitimately the biggest edge in 2021 in particular, where people have access to optimizers and projections and things like that. So I'd watch this one second. And then third, learn what contest to play. This is probably the second most valuable thing, the second biggest edge you can add in your NBA DFS process is playing the best contest possible. So in this video, I break down the full DraftKings and FanDuel lobby, talk about exactly what contests I think are the best ones to play in order and why, up to like a $20,000 bankroll, which after that point, I think you probably have a good sense of what the best contests are. I would go watch that video third. And those videos, that's like the core curriculum, SaberSim NBA approach. So start there. But all right, let me get to some of these questions here that came in live, because I know you guys have been waiting patiently. Ponda619 said, are you guys still doing the promotion with Mikey Knife Fight for a month of SaberSim? Yes, email support at sabersim.com. James said, how do you use the optimizer? I'm a new subscriber and trying to get better at DFS. James, don't know if you've stuck around here. I'm sorry, should have answered this question a little bit earlier because I would have given you the same overall curriculum here. I would say, well, I would start with, depending on what sport you want to play, I would start with this video. If you're playing NBA, 4 keys to beating NBA DFS in 2021. I know this video is a little long, but I think it will be really helpful if you legitimately just kind of need the basics of how to use the tool. I recorded a much shorter video for that. It is on our help docs here, support.sabersim.com. Under FAQs, I made a tutorial here. I'm building NBA DFS lineups and totally lost. Help. If you click this, it will bring up this much shorter 15-minute video where I kind of walk through the very basics of what is actually going on and how to build your very first lineups. But once you've got that and kind of figured out what's happening here, I would go check out some of these videos in the strategy sessions section here. So we have one for NBA, 4 keys to beating NBA DFS in 2021. We also did one for NFL, Ultimate Guide to Beating NFL GPPs in 2021. It'll give you more of a full breakdown of what to do and how to get value out of SaberSim. So, Don said, after viewing several office hour sessions, I feel like Max and Matt tend to modify exposures over other customizations. Is that true? Matt definitely leans more heavily into exposure editing. But he built all the original models, everything that goes into what determines the projections. So it makes sense that he's definitely very trusting of the projections overall. Max, I think, actually does have an approach that is a little bit more heavy on the projection editing side. I like to edit exposures more than projections, but I also definitely do a little bit more editing ownership. Is one way that across multiple sports is a way that I like to add value. I feel like I'm pretty good at intuitively projecting ownership and making adjustments to the ownership projections. So everybody kind of does their own thing a little bit. A lot of different ways to use the tool. So. Matt said, is there a clear way to get a rule in for NBA? Like if Anthony Davis is in the lineup, give me one of Bridges or LaMelo as an example for today's slate. So I answered a similar question at the beginning. We don't have player groups like that. And again, the reason why is because we're taking a fundamentally different approach with the way we build lineups here with SaberSim than a traditional tool does. So on a traditional optimizer, right, like a player group like that, if Anthony Davis is in the lineup, give me one of Bridges or LaMelo, is to account for an estimated correlation between those two players, basically, like an assumption of correlation that those players are positively correlated, and to just kind of force those two players together. Because a traditional optimizer is dumb, frankly, and it's going to just optimize by average projection, right? So it's trying to kind of guess at a game script and a correlation value for those players. Well, because we have simulated out all of these games, first of all, we actually know what these correlations between these players are. And I think one thing that I've noticed a lot here is that these correlations that people assume are positive are often neutral or negative. So first of all, based on our thousands of simulations of this game, we don't actually believe that those two players are positively correlated. We think they're negatively correlated. But we also have the game simulations themselves. So clearly there are going to be game simulations where both players succeed together, right? Maybe it's this game simulations where the game goes to double overtime, right? Like that's a clear game simulation where both players are likely to outperform their salary. Well, we are leveraging those game simulations directly by using this sim variance slider. The higher sim variance is, the smaller the bucket of individual game sims we're using to determine the projections when we build each lineup. We also value correlation, right? So these things together will dynamically create the right combinations of players in accordance with what their real correlations are and what the actual game scripts are where those players have success together. So you don't have to make a guess at what a correlation between two players are or what the game script looks like in those two in those game scripts where both players succeed, right? We have the precise correlation values for those players and where sim variant, and we leverage the sims themselves to build lineups that are taking advantage of those game scripts. Now, of course, one thing I think you can do is if you have a particular stance that you want to take on the slate, right? You want to play a set of Anthony Davis lineups where these other players are included. I think one thing you can do is make use of our filters tool to include more of those kinds of lineups, right? So let's go ahead and update this. What you can do is filter by Anthony Davis lineups, and then filter by LaMelo Ball lineups, right? For example. So we only have one of these in our original set of 20 lineups, but we can go over to the pool and we can add more of these lineups in if we want them, right? These are all still high saber scoring lineups. So if we want to emphasize this particular combination of players together, we can add lineups to the pool like this. And maybe on the flip side, we also then go back to my lineups, and you can then reverse this filter and say, show me Anthony Davis lineups that don't have Ball. And then you could even remove these lineups, right? So you can have this kind of level of control here. You can even remove all of them if you wanted. You can have this level of control to emphasize these combinations of players here, but we don't have a player grouping tool like what you've described and like what Clement asked for here at the start of the stream, frankly, because again, I think it is I don't think it adds value. We don't think it adds value, and we think it would complicate the product unnecessarily. So, but all right, cool. Still a lot of questions to go. We got a lot to talk about here today, so we'll keep it rolling. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to keep knocking out some of these questions that came in live here. Thomas said, sorry, just joining. I was curious what to know your thoughts were on contests like multipliers. I feel roughly similar about the multiplier contest type as I do cash overall. Like, I think those kind of go hand in hand. I don't think triple ups and triple ups in particular, but even then like quintuple ups, I think those are something that really starts to make sense to add in when you are when you've already played all the best GPPs, right? So again, I know I keep preaching these same videos, but in this one in particular, the NBA one, contest selection for NBA, I actually call out the exact moment or exact bankroll size where I think it makes sense to start playing cash games. I think I would emphasize the single entry double ups and the head-to-heads that I do in that video. But after that, I think you could justify playing a bit of multipliers in contests that fit. But I don't know if there's going to be very many of those. Like, let's look. So multipliers, let's say you're trying to play some multipliers for tonight's slate, right? These are like multi-entry contests of under 100 entrants. I think these are going to be pretty sharp. I don't know. I don't think I would actually, now that I'm actually looking at the lobby, I think I would be a long way before I wanted to start playing contests like these. There's going to be a ton. You can get a ton of money down in very good GPPs first. You can get better money down in head-to-heads and 50-50s and double ups. And then I don't know. I mean, I don't even know if I would jump to start playing these. I don't know when I would start to incorporate multipliers in for the NBA lobby. I wonder what NFL looks like. Let's see. 20 entry max with 7,000 people. Yeah, I mean, what's concerning here is like, so maybe some of the single entry stuff, right? But this doesn't even have, this only has 200 effective entrants here. I think these contests are going to be really sharp, to be completely honest. I guess this is for the showdown, which maybe is going to be, is the main slate for next week posted? No, this is the main slate. Yeah, these are going to be sharp. I would probably stay away. I don't think these are ever going to be the best place to go. Yeah, I'm just like looking at this 77 entrants, 77 entry limit with 2,600 people. is a very low effective entrance. So that's my take. I would probably stay away. I think there's way better contests, GPPs, head-to-heads, GPPs first, then head-to-heads and single entry double ups to play first. So cool. Marbrand here. I saw this was a question you had asked in Slack here too, so I'll answer this now. Is there value in looking at player props with SaberSim projections to quality control projections that might be off? I don't think so, because I think player props are beatable, right? I think even like closing line player props are pretty beatable. In fact, when people ask like, well, hey, what's the best way to make use of the betting tool? Most of the time, we send people to the props. Our NBA model is crushing player props so far this season, even at closing lines. So if it was a perfectly efficient market for player props, then I think you could go in and say, well, the prop for, I don't know, Anthony Davis is, his line is set at like 30.5 points, right? So maybe this number's a little high, but we're beating those props themselves. The sims are beating the props. So I would probably not go and say lost my train of thought. I would probably not go and then use props to change projections because the projections beat the props. I do think if you have access to the betting tool, if you're a betting subscriber, I think we're doing pretty well on the main market bets as well. But if you are, especially in NBA, if you're ever seeing something where, like, I would say if there's like a 2+ unit or more on some of these main market bets, we check for this kind of thing and we'll make adjustments on our end for this. But I do think you could check here as well and maybe get an idea if we might be off on a game by looking at some of these numbers, especially like a 2+ unit difference, right? That's typically is an indication to us that, like, is a closing line 2 units inefficient? Probably not. Like, maybe we need to check something there. So, you know, if you see 2 units on the under, we might be under projecting those players. Now, again, that's something that we check for and we will typically fix that ourselves, but it can be something to look at. But I wouldn't use the props as a signal. In fact, when I see other models out there that are using player props as a heavy signal, a lot of times I cast a little bit of doubt for me, because the prop markets for like any major sport are generally inefficient and soft enough that like a good model should be able to beat them. Like, so if a model is basically taking props as gospel, first of all, that model is going to be so turbulent because those lines like move like crazy as they get pushed up and down. But second, I would question that a bit. So going to jump back. There are still some questions that came in Slack that I want to hit first here. So this was an interesting question here from Tyler and sparked some conversation. He said, for NBA slates where there is a clear top value, like projected for 8 points per dollar, who is going to be very highly owned, does it ever make sense to just fade that player and hope for the best? For example, Drummond is one of the best plays of the year so far and is already projecting for 70% ownership. Is there a point where ownership is so high that it makes sense to not play him at all? And there's an interesting discussion here going on in Slack. It seems like the same conclusion that I'm going to say has already been reached here. I would say typically no, like depending on how good the value is. But when we're talking about a player like Drummond in this particular case, it takes, I mean, obviously from a theoretical standpoint, right? If we had a very theoretical game theory approach, you know, if he's literally 100% owned, then yeah, then it makes sense to fade, right? But the line of where that's drawn is actually probably really, really high, right? Like much higher than his practical ownership is ever going to be, right? There was an interesting question. I can't even remember where I heard this, but the last time we had a Drummond slate, man, I wonder what podcast that was. There was this conversation about like high stakes Drummond came in at like 90 to 95% owned, especially for single entry. And I think there's still even a legitimate conversation there of like, is that too low? Like, it still just makes sense to just play him even at that ownership. We can just see this by just clicking on his range of outcomes, right? Like, look, he's 5.5K on DraftKings, right? His 25th percentile that he meets or exceeds 75% of the time is already 39.5 divided by 5,700 is already 7x. That's his 25th percentile. And if we just look at like what this range of outcomes kind of looks like here, right? Like where is he inefficient? Like even if he 6x's, 57 times 6, 34 points ish, right? Like if we look at where that line is here, I mean that's like his bottom 10% of outcomes, right? I mean, it's just in NBA, low variance sport, normally distributed players, it is overwhelmingly optimal to play him. The conversation here, and Tyler, actually, I'm going to read this because I really like this analysis. So I was going to say one thing you can do to just test this is to like literally just crank his ownership up, like run a build at this, right? And just see what you get. What you're going to get is you're still going to get 100% Drummond, which is a very clear statement from SaberSim that he's basically optimal. I mean, if you put him at 100, right, you're going to run into a weird, like, obvious, like, again, from the theoretical game theory standpoint, at 100, at truly 100% ownership, then the fade probably makes sense. Like, it almost certainly makes sense. The builder won't deal with that theoretical game theory standpoint necessarily optimally, right? But you can test this at like very high levels and see, like, if he's 90% owned, does it still make sense to play in my contest? And you'll see that he pops up a lot. But Tyler said that he did 3 builds, one with Drummond locked, one with him excluded from the pool, another with him included but not locked. And basically came to the conclusion that he's sacrificing 15 points of projection to fade Drummond, of raw average projection, which is enormous. It's a big difference, right? For a just by default, you are capping your ceiling of that lineup you're capping the highest projected lineup you can build by 15 points. That's an enormous sacrifice. So, but yeah, I think the easiest way to like answer some of these questions for yourself is to experiment with using different ownership values. Like plug in 95% here and build it. And I did that when I saw this question came in, and I saw that I was still getting 100% Drummond, which basically indicates to me that like his optimal ownership is never going to be met in almost any contest, even at high stakes single entry, because he's just projected so highly, right? And you can even see like a guy like Paul Reed, right? Like the next best guy, right? The next best value play on the slate, right? There's like already some more question marks here. Right, his 25th percentile is 18 points. Now, yes, that's 6x his salary, but that's low. That's a low raw point value, and this player will be more impacted by inching his ownership up when you actually run the builder, right? So, Guy Will Gamble said, usually the answer is going to depend on the fragility of the projection and the situation and salary. In NBA, for these kinds of situations, the fragility doesn't exist like it does for other sports. Yeah, I think that's true. Due to the nature of outcomes and what drives performances in NBA versus other sports. Yeah, I think that's well said, right? I mean, the best projected baseball hitter still like is only going to get up at the plate 4 times, hit the ball 4 times, and they're most common outcome is almost always still going to be 0 points. Even like a horribly inefficiently priced wide receiver in football has to rely on the quarterback delivering him the ball and probably needs to like break a big play at some point or hit a 100-yard bonus or do things that like the sport itself plays out in a way that is higher variance. Drummond practically just has to stay on the court. Like that is essentially his success condition. You're not waiting for a splash play. Is just being on the court is going to soak up so much like rebound share and usage rate that his price is that inefficient. So, but I will say I love this kind of analysis. So I like of going through and like doing these test builds yourself, Tyler, I think is fantastic. That is the exact kind of like critical thinking and process to follow to think critically through this step by step. That kind of thinking will take you very far in DFS. I think that's something that is like understated, honestly, when people talk about a DFS process. Like, I think it's very easy to get in the habit of stepping through your lineup building steps that you do every night, right? I research this and I adjust ownership and I go through and I tweak the sliders slightly and I adjust my exposures, right? Like that's all process. But what is also process is asking yourself these kinds of questions and experimenting with it and challenging the builder in this way, right? You learn a lot about DFS quickly and what optimal strategies are by doing these kinds of things. Asking yourself, what is Drummond's theoretical ownership, optimal ownership according to SaberSim? Does he ever get faded even at 95% ownership? Like those are such valuable questions to ask. So that's awesome stuff there. But I'm going to keep us rolling here for now. And let me go ahead and see. James, real quick here said, do you suggest creating your own head-to-heads or joining somebody else's that's already created? Post your own. You'll generally see softer fields picking up head-to-heads. Sharper players are going to post probably more often. You're going to probably find that you are running into sharper players overall if you're picking up head-to-heads that are already posted in the lobby. Now, one thing you can do is kind of try to snipe head-to-heads against people that don't have the experience badge, but there's a lot of other cash game players that will be doing the same thing, so it can be hard to find those users, and a lot of times those users aren't the ones that are going to be posting their own contests anyway. Posting contests is actually a little bit hard to find overall on both DraftKings and FanDuel. I don't think they, based on their UI, they don't seem to me to ask to be like asking new players to go post their own head-to-heads, probably to save those players, to be honest. So I think for that reason as well, you have sharper players that are posting more often than joining. So that's what I'd recommend. And I would withdraw your head-to-heads that don't get picked up 5 minutes or so before lock, because otherwise you'll get auto-matched against other players that have posted their head-to-heads who are probably going to be sharper players. I would say, again, these are things that can sound trivial or sound unexciting at the very least, but with the edge in cash being as small as it is, they're important things to do to maintain the edge that is there. So Eric said, related to late swap and NBA, should I make any adjustments to the sliders or just continue to use the default settings based on max entry and contest size? Would adjusting the sliders add any value? Yeah, good question. This is another one that came in last week here. I would say this. So when you are late swapping, right? Like if we look at the sliders here for, let's say you're playing the 20 max 10 to 50K, right? So the value of ownership, of fading ownership, right? Playing this game theory question that ultimately comes in with ownership is kind of making an assumption that you're playing against a relatively sharp field that is acting fairly rationally, right? And you have this question of like, at what point is the payoff if the player that is projected well to succeed less than what it should be because of the ownership of that player, right? When you're talking about late swap in NBA, especially at the lower stakes you go in the softer fields you play against, the field isn't going to adjust optimally to news breaking. So there is less value out of fading ownership, right? For example, again, pick some stud player playing in one of the late games, right? Maybe we get news that, I don't know, Trae Young's taking the night off for the Hawks, right? That is going to dramatically shake up what optimal lineups look like for the slate. It's going to open up a ton of value. If that news had broken before the slate locked, guys like DeAndre Hunter or Bogdanovich or things like that would be enormously high owned. But at lower stakes, even at medium stakes, right? Even in average contests, not enough people are going to late swap to get to that efficient ownership. And I think you can just add a ton of value by just making the swaps. So all of that to say is when I am playing NBA and I am late swapping, if significant news has broken, right? Like a player has gotten ruled out. I would say significant news is pretty much any player that was going to start not starting or getting ruled out of the game. I often will start thinking about turning down the ownership fade slider and even maybe the variance slider so that I can late swap and just get the new best plays into the lineup, right? Because again, I don't think the field is going to get enough ownership on that player to make it efficient. And that's my edge. Like I don't need to worry about fading ownership at that point, even on most of my other players in my pool, because the edge is so high on getting the players whose value is now opened up. The one other thing I will say there is, because when you're late swapping, certain players have already been locked into your lineups, you may be able to get less exposure to a player who now has significant value. That is another reason why I like to turn ownership fade down. Like, again, for example, let's say that Trae Young gets ruled out, right? And if I could rebuild all my lineups from scratch, I would have 100% Bogdanovich, just as an example, right? But because of the salary that's already been used in certain lineups and the positions that have already been used in certain lineups, I can only get 40% of him. I personally don't want the builder to sacrifice another 10% and only give me 30% Bogdanovich, because my sim variance slider was too high and I didn't roll the right dice on those sims, or because my ownership fade slider was too high and his ownership was too high based on our model, right? So for those reasons, I will often turn my sliders down a bit when late swapping, when big news comes out. If no big news is coming out, obviously, potentially I might not swap at all, but if new sims run and I want to swap because the sims have slightly tweaked minutes or something like that, I will just typically leave the sliders where they are. So, but I do think you can squeeze out a little bit of additional value there. So, I will say, back to that last question or 2 questions ago, Shady Advice made a good point here in Slack just now, and he said that he would only fade a player like Drummond in that if you have a reasonably high prior on his injury probability. I think that is basically the game you are playing if you fade at all, as you are playing an injury bet or a foul trouble bet, which I don't think those are predictive. Like, you are basically gambling there on that outcome. And I think it's true. I think that's the bet you are making in that particular case. But I don't know how you get there in a way that is like rigorous or truly predictive. Like, how would you know that? So, but anyway, interesting conversation continuing to go on in Slack there. I'm going to move us along here, and let's see. Rod asks a good question here and said, sorry if this has been asked before, but is there a way to see how projections change throughout the slate? It seems late swapping is sometimes a mystery as to why exposures change so much from the original build. That's a good question. So we don't have something in terms of like a change log that shows you exactly what changes were made on sim to sim. We want to provide a little bit more visibility in the app into what is happening when a game gets simmed. So we're kind of talking about adding that as a future improvement. One thing, like at the very least, would be adding individual timestamps for each game rather than just this like broad overall timestamp for all games, right? I think a change log of like, this is exactly what changed here would also be helpful. I can see how that would be useful, especially when determining if it makes sense to swap or what sliders to use when you swap or something like that. We don't really have a great way to do that at the moment. I would say I like to use that NBA lineup alerts channel to kind of help me track why sims are running, right? So like, let's say, for example, a sim where, like earlier today, Joel Embiid gets ruled out, and then a sim for the Sixers-Knicks game immediately runs, right? Like, it's obvious that that's going to have a high impact. But there will be sims later in the day where nothing happens and a sim runs, right? That typically means that there's just like probably a very minor minutes adjustment, like very minor, maybe a couple minutes in either direction, that created a new sim to run. Or maybe you'll see a starting lineup come out, right? And then a sim will get kicked off, right? But no player got ruled out, or there was no surprise with the starting lineup, right? That's probably somewhat minor as well. I realize this is really fluid and not very like concrete. The overall, I definitely agree that it would be helpful having this be a little bit more descriptive. But you can kind of use, I would say the best thing I could advise you is using that NBA lineup alerts channel in Slack to help guide you a little bit for what you are seeing and why a sim is running overall. I use that a lot. That's what I do. So, okay. 2 questions on Showdown here. So we'll hit both of these. I'm going to read them both and maybe we'll talk about them both. But Thomas said, when you do showdown captain slates, do you usually have multiple captains? And then Jonathan asked, what is the best way to add value and increase the chance of winning for showdown single game slates in the NFL? So first of all, broken record Jordan here. We have a strategy session for this, and it will go into more detail than I can here. So for NFL, we did it for the opening night. 3 rules for beating NFL Showdown and single game GPPs. This is over an hour. It will go into far more detail than I can do here on this stream. But for NFL Showdowns, I think we are very, very uniquely equipped to solve the game of showdowns, really, but particularly NFL showdowns, because we have the individual game simulations of the game, right? We've simulated this game thousands of times. And when you build your lineups at almost any default slider setting, your sim variance is going to be at 10, which means we are using the single game simulations to build each lineup. Like, that is hugely powerful. On another traditional tool or hand building, right? You have to come up with the game scripts yourself, right? You have to literally say okay, I'm imagining a game script where this particular game outcome takes place. And then you have to come up with what the lineup is that corresponds to that. There's this compounding assumptions issue that comes into play where you might you probably have some bias about what game scripts are possible in that game. And then you also are probably going to be somewhat inaccurate in knowing what the optimal lineup is for that particular game, right? When you're using sim variance at 10, every single lineup we build is going to be resting on a single game simulation, and it is going to include the players that are optimal in that game simulation, right? So I think that is hugely valuable, and it is important to understand that that is happening already behind the scenes, because it will help you realize that what I'm ultimately going to say here is you don't have to do very much, I think, in Showdown in particular to be successful with SaberSim, but that will help you understand why, because that's all happening behind the scenes already for you, which is basically almost an entire process. Like if you were using another traditional optimizer or something like that, that would be your process, is optimally figuring out what the game scripts are and the lineups are that are associated with those game scripts. That's already automated for you. So I think the ways you can add value to your Showdown process here are kind of subtle, and I think they're minor things that maybe squeeze out a little bit of an edge here or there. Again, this video, the strategy session, will go into far more detail about all of this than I can do here. But I think one of the biggest ways you can add value is by trying to intentionally avoid duplication. I think there's a couple good ways of doing that. I think one is, you'll see the default max salary here is $49.9, right? Most of the lineups that you'll see in the pool in a given contest are going to be built at the max salary or very close to it. I think $49.9 is a good place to start. I think you can justify bringing this down even a little bit lower if you're playing the biggest contests out there. And I think differentiating your lineups in other ways, let's say you're playing the biggest contests, to avoid duplication can be another way to add value, right? So if you are getting duplicated in a contest, you are immediately losing expected value on your lineups, right? Coming up on time here, so I'm going to say, if you're interested in why that is, I would go watch this video, Why is Avoiding Duplication Important in DFS? This is a mathematical breakdown of why getting duped is negative EV. But for now, we'll just take that as fact because it is fact. I think having an ownership fade slider that is non-zero in Showdown is interesting. What it is going to do, and it is default, so I think it's good. But what it is going to do is it's going to, again, fade players that are more highly owned. And in particular, it's going to get you exposure to players that have an extremely low projection and also a very low ownership. And those are the players that ultimately end up fitting into lineups when you have those big solo winners for Showdown. We'll look at the lineups here. It's going to emphasize heavily players that have an extremely low projection, but a non-zero projection. Even in some interesting captains here, but primarily in the flex spots, right? You're going to see use of players that you are basically have a projection of under 2 or 3 points, right? Where you're counting on a 95th or 99th percentile outcome for this player, but also then a lineup that isn't going to be duplicated and is therefore very positive expected value. I think that can also be another great way to think about this. I know that those are the defaults, right? So I know maybe telling you, hey, how can I add value to my SaberSim process? Well, just play the default sliders, right? Isn't super helpful. I do know, I guess who I'm really targeting here, I know there are some players out there that use 0010 sliders. I use this set of slider a lot as well. This is just going to give you single game simulation optimals. I do think introducing some ownership fade can be interesting here because it will help you avoid getting duplicated. Another way to do this, though, is to just get some leverage overall on the field on some of the highest owned plays, right? Like we can look at this. Yeah, so we're double the field on Najee Harris. But if we expand our pool and maybe look at what our entire pool of lineups look like, right, his chance of showing up in these optimal lineups, these 1,500 lineups, is actually really only about even with the field. Like maybe there are better captains with a higher chance of being optimal than they are going to be owned as a way to go there. So you could spend some time, I think, looking at this and maybe intentionally trying to find some leverage on lower owned captains by doing some research this way too. I'm going to quickly, because like now that we're here, Thomas said, do you usually have multiple captains? I would say almost always. Yeah, I don't even know the last Showdown slate I played where I just had a single captain. I almost always have multiple captains. But I do think letting the default sliders dictate how many captains is appropriate based on your contest is a good approach. Like if you told me you were playing a 3 max and just taking a shot at 3 lineups and maybe playing a smaller contest, you might only have 1 captain. You might have 2. You could have 3. If you have a 20 max, right? Like your captain portfolio is going to be a lot smaller. In the 150 max, especially if you're playing the biggest contest, you're going to get a huge portion. You're going to get a huge different allocation of different captains. So I would allow the sim variance slider and the default settings and what you're getting out of your test builds to help dictate what makes sense there. But hopefully that was helpful. Again, I feel like I kind of like rushed through that. I think there's actually quite a bit to unpack with single game strategy. So I cannot recommend enough to go and check out that video that I called out here, our NFL Showdowns strategy session, because it goes into way more detail here. But overall, I think the primary lessons from that video, if I can remember correctly, are to, 1, understand the value, just the sheer amount of value you are getting from leveraging game simulations when you build your lineups, because it is enormous. And then 2, to focus in a little bit more on particularly, I think anything you're doing to add value to the SaberSim process for NFL Showdowns should be for avoiding duplication. I think that is by far the biggest value add you can add to your NFL Showdown process on the app, is do things that help create lineups that are less likely to be duplicated. There's a variety of ways to do that. You can set your max salary lower. You can take stands on highly owned players and have negative leverage on those players, or completely fade them. You can make use of the ownership fade slider to incorporate more low owned players into your lineups. You can use our filters to go find combinations of players that are uncommon, right? Like, how many people are going to play a Ben Roethlisberger with a Bears defense lineup? Not very many. But there are, I need to edit projections, right? There are a lot of lineups in the pool that do this, right? Now, traditional optimizer, if you're getting captain Ben Roethlisberger with Bears defense, that's just a lineup that appeared out of sheer luck because the projections add up. With SaberSim, there is a game simulation where this lineup was optimal, right? There's actually even a lineup that would show up in your top 100 like this, right? How strange is this lineup, right? This is actually a lineup that's probably so unlikely to be played, but there's a game simulation backing this up. This is a powerful lineup, right? This lineup is probably not going to be duplicated. Two defenses, defense up against the opposing QB in the captain spot, but we know there's a game simulation that defends this lineup, that backs it up, and it's so unlikely to be duplicated, right? Like I literally think, especially if you're, I'm gonna go on a very brief rant here, and then we'll come back around. I honestly think that if you are playing large field multi-entry GPPs for NFL Showdown, it is almost the optimal strategy to go through your pool of 1,500 lineups and hand pick every lineup that makes no sense. Like literally look at it and be like, does that lineup make sense? Is there any reason why somebody hand building a lineup would build that lineup? And if the answer is no, then to put it in your pool. Because again, all of these lineups are so roughly similar in terms of what their Saber score is going to be, right? What their overall probably projection and expectation is, right? These are all lineups that just have a single game simulation from our game simulations backing it up. That the value, I think, is so significant of creating a lineup that isn't duplicated, that's the optimal approach. And I think that can actually be like extremely effective. And it's something that the sharpest NFL Showdown players are really, really good at. There is a Twitter handle called DFS Facts. I don't know if any of you guys follow them, but this person, I don't know if he's a man or a woman, but this person basically does analysis of contests after they've run for different things, different sports. And one of the points that I'll just say he hammers home over and over again is that the most skilled NFL Showdown players are really good at not getting duplicated, right? They are really good at not getting duplicated. Because again, a lot of these lineups have a similar chance of being optimal, but they have very different percent chances of being duplicated. There are lineups that are much more likely to be duplicated than others that have a similar win equity. So I think that's a huge value add. So anyway, I will get off my soapbox here now, and move on. But I think that's where I would focus. So, okay. Guy Will Gamble said, are cash games viable for single game slates? I don't really think so. Honestly, I would stay away from them. Like you're playing, like people are going to fall into the good plays so much in cash, right? Like ultimately, I've talked about this before, in main slate cash games, what you're basically trying to do is you're trying to find soft competition that like frankly doesn't know what they're doing. Like they're maybe not using projections or not using very good ones, and grinding out a small ROI against people that can't effectively optimize for the highest mean projected lineup. And on Showdown, so many people are just going to fall into the right plays. Like your edge, you might find people are playing a lineup that is 5 to 10 to 15 points even suboptimal on a main slate, right? That's your edge. You're playing against somebody in your head-to-heads that is playing a lineup that is projected on the mean for 10 less points than yours is. And you win over the long term against that person. But in Showdown, you're just not going to find that. People are just going to like, people can close their eyes and fill out a lineup that maxes out the salary. And at worst, they're going to end up only a few points less projected than you. So I just don't think the edge is there. Maybe, I mean, if your bankroll's enormous and you are playing all of the best NFL Showdown GPPs, which there are a lot based on our standards, and you're already getting a ton of action down on the main slates, maybe at that point it makes sense to play cash games. But I don't think the edge is there. So also said, gonna build my 150 nonsense lineup pool now. That's one of those things where like part of the fun of doing the show live here is, I talk through this stuff live. I get to go on my own rants, and sometimes I stumble upon little things like that. And like, I've always tried to make an effort to avoid duplication when I'm building my showdown lineups, but I actually haven't really thought about it in that way until that just came out of my mouth here live on stream. And now I'm kind of excited to do it for this slate tonight too, particularly because this game is so ugly, right? This is like the perfect game to do it for anyway. This is an ugly game, and it is going to be very easy to make like nonsense lineups tonight. I think I'm going to kind of do that. I'm not playing 150. 150 would be a lot to do. I think I'll probably have like 60 lineups total tonight, but I feel like building 60 nonsense lineups actually kind of works. And I think how I'm going to do this is I'm going to set my lineups. I'm going to build my full pool. I'm going to set my lineups to 1, and I'm going to press this button to put this away, and I'm going to go through and I'm going to do like this. And I'm going to be looking for lineups that either have some nonsense combination of players or some player like this, right? Like this is practically enough to avoid duplication a lot of times. Or maybe a salary like this, or even lower, like this, right? And I'm going to try to put together the least likely to be duplicated lineups I can play for the slate tonight as an experiment. Because I think that's where all the edge is. So. Okay. Last question here today. I think we got to everything. Let me do a quick scan. I feel terrible when I realize I missed somebody's question. So let me see. I think I got to everything though. I think I did. All right, cool. So last question. We'll hit this one real quick. This is from Bionic Knee. And he said, if there's time, want to talk through a recap of the sports betting national championship. Yes, so there is time here. We'll do this here right at the end. So SaberSim had 6 or so of us that were participating in this sports betting championship here over the weekend. So me and Will and Andy and Giant Squid and Ben and Ross were all participating in this year. Varying levels of success. Me and Will put a bunch of crying emojis in the chat. Me and Will went all in on the Orlando Magic on the first night on Friday night and both lost. He had the money line and I had the spread. I had them plus 3.5 and they got basically blown out by the Spurs. So we were out very quickly. Andy had a very legitimate sweat going in through much of Saturday and I think was in second for a while and then went all in with a $30,000 wager on the Chicago Bulls money line at like minus 165. And then the Sixers beat the Bulls in Chicago. So unfortunately knocked Andy out there, or I think very close. I think he maybe had a bit of a little bit of a sweat with like a parlay with like maybe a little bit like $5,000 left or something like that. So maybe not a true all in bet there. But that basically took Andy out of it. I think the most interesting story, Giant Squid had a huge parlay going that would have probably won him the whole event if it hit. It was, man, I can't even remember now. It was, I know at the very least, it was Scotty Barnes and Jarrett Allen assist overs that were both underdog bets and both hit in earlier NBA games. And then basically an even money bet was the last leg of the parlay on Spencer Dinwiddie points over 16.5. And Dinwiddie scored like 3 points. So we're all very mad at Spencer Dinwiddie here today. Killed that bet there. But it was a lot of fun. I know I wasn't there live. I know Will and Andy and a few of the other SaberSim guys were there. And it sounds like everybody had a bunch of time at the live event. It was fun to participate. I think there was a little bit. There's definitely been some drama about the issues with limiting and things like that. I won't go into that at all here. But that's kind of how everything worked out. So we had quite a decent little group of people involved. A few of us had sweats going into the last day, and a handful of us were knocked out on night one. But it was fun. So. Anyway, I think I will go ahead and leave it right there for today's stream. Another fantastic Monday stream. Always a lot to talk about here on these Mondays when we've got the giveaway and the winners of the Max Challenge to talk about, but then, of course, all the questions that everybody has had over the course of the weekend after playing a full weekend of DFS. So glad to be back. We will be right back, or I will be right back here again tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern, hosting another office hour. So you have questions. If you build your nonsense lineup builds for NFL Showdown tonight, if you're playing the 8-game NBA slate, if you're playing the 3-game NHL slate, whatever's going on, if you have questions, email us, support@sabersim.com, or pop them into the office hours channel in Slack, and we'll get back to this again tomorrow. We should have a strategy session this week, shooting for Thursday. Still figuring out exactly what that video will look like in terms of topic. If you guys ever have like an idea or maybe a thought of something that you think would make for a good longer video, feel free to shout it out too. Always, these videos are supposed to serve you guys. So if you have thoughts on what you would like to see a longer video about that we don't already have out there already, definitely feel free to shout that out. But enough of me talking here. I am going to let everybody go, and I'll see y'all tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in again, and good luck tonight.